Hey kids, welcome to another episode of GLEN YAPS. We have a bass guitar strapped to my body today. And I don't know how to play 5-string that well. I've had this bass for a while, but I've used it on recordings and stuff, so we'll try it for this little lesson. So this lesson is basically on how to try to get your band a lot tighter. There are some mechanics involved with trying to get your finger technique and strumming technique with guitar tight with the drums. Some people, they just like a band just to have fun. Everybody counts the song in, or one person counts the song in, and everybody just starts and just how it goes, that's how it goes. There's nothing wrong with that whatsoever. I'm not saying that anybody is playing that way wrong. The whole focus of this is just to show you how I like my bands to progress, to get tighter, and most of the musicians that I play with feel the same way on how to get the band as tight as possible, almost to the point where the band sounds, or you're at least you're attempting to make it sound like the band is running on one brain, okay? And everything is just perfectly in place and in unison. Some might call that mechanical. That's true. You definitely don't want to sound as tight as a machine, but there are advantages of having a tight band when you're playing complicated music. It actually, just for the players that like that style of playing, it's just enjoyable to play lots of notes and connect them all to the other person in the band's parts, and see how many songs you can actually play with that kind of intense brain work, I guess. Now, I'm not going to play complicated, mainly because I've got long fingernails glued on here for doing some guitar parts. I chicken pick a lot on my guitar, and I play bass the same way, but sometimes the strings get a little too clicky. So anyway, so I'm just going to play some of the basics just so with the drum machine, and just to get you an idea on what I'm talking about, and hopefully the audio is good in here. My bass amp is across the room. I'm doing this via camera only, not through the mixer and all that. I may have to try an alternative way if this doesn't work. And I'm just going to kind of straighten the camera out just a smidge. Okay, so this doesn't involve you having to be the greatest player of any of the instruments. What it does, though, involve is you focusing on the simplest beat and trying to make it as solid and tight as possible. Before you can play tight with other musicians, you have to basically be a tight player yourself. And when I say tight, I mean tight with time. So the best way to get better at being a tight player to time is to work with wonderful metronomes like this one. This one is a Boss metronome, DB60. I've explained this one many videos. Also, drum machine. I find guitar players hate metronomes, but they kind of like the drum machine thing because it sounds like a drummer, for random practice and just for screwing around. And they can feel where the beats, kick and snare, kind of rotate through the bars of music. So anyways, let's see here. So we're going to get this one simple beat going, just so you get an idea of what it sounds like. Okay, so in drumming terms, this is a pretty basic beat, but there is one little cliffhanger in there. In old vintage drum terms, that's called a vamp. So it's like boom boom ba da boom boom ba boom ba da boom boom ba. So you kind of sing it to kind of get it in your head. So you think of that drum beat as a song by itself. You try and memorize that pattern. And then with bass, you try and mimic that. And the whole idea is to play the notes as tight to that as possible. Now to break it down even more, that basic beat, I think we got that one programmed as just... So basically that beat is one bar. So one bar of music, so you would count to 4 being one bar. Okay, so I'll show you. 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Now you can count that variable ways by adding a little vocal change for the little vamp section, where the snare drum does that weird thing. And a 3 and 4 and 1, 2 and a 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and a 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and a 3 and 4, 2 and a 3 and 4. Okay, I'm going to slow this down just a tad if I can. This is a new drum software for me, so I want to get it slower so everybody can hear it properly. So let's go down to 80. So 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. You've heard this beat in tons of songs. It's in hundreds of songs actually. When you're counting one simple bar of music like this, the kick drum and snare alternate between even and odd numbers. So let's just say if this beat was any more basic, the kick would just be on 1 and 3 and the snare on 2 and 4. But there is a second kick drum hit in it, and so that kind of changes it just a little bit. And I'm just going to try and expand my screen here. Just so I can see things better myself. All right, so the basic thing would be for the bass player, in this case, is try and get as tight and as simple with playing a note on all the quarter note counts. So all the numbers that you count, just hit. Okay, so it'd be like 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Or you can just go on the 1. We can even go more basic. 2, 3, and 4, and 1. 3 and 4 and 1. 3 and 4 and 1. 2 and 3 and 4 and 1. 2 and 3 and 4. Okay? Pretty basic. So you can sustain that whole note for the whole count. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and you get the idea. You want to be able to hit exactly practice hitting with that kick drum. That was a bit off. Okay. One of the simplest methods to make a single note, like sound tight, is to obviously definitely nail it exactly with the kick, right? But also to chop off some of the sustain. Now, before I start the second bar, I kind of mute the string a little bit. Just before it goes. So I mute that sustaining note on the end after the fourth quarter note. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. I kind of just touch my finger on to muffle it. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 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 1, 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. So that's controlling the sustain of the note, and when you hit it, will tighten your band up. You have to be a counter though. You don't have to count out loud like I'm doing, but you have to get used to counting in your head. And the idea of doing that at shorter intervals, I should say. So let's do it with just one. Now in that case there, I try and stop it before the number 2, or basically on the number 2. So 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2, and you see my finger, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2. Okay? That alone makes it tighter. So let's go with the first note like I was doing it, and let's do 2 hits with that. Let's try and hit there. Let's just do it without any muting. Let's just go. with it not, with you not muting, and I've got a bad habit, I mute a lot, the sound starts to rumble and get out of control. Let's try that again. I got that backwards. So. Okay, it sounds fine like that. I mean, that could be your song and that's the way it goes. But techniques to make it sound tighter take practice. They take a little bit of work. So. That's mimicking the kick and the snare parts all the way through. Fingernail. Okay, you get the idea. Wrong notes and all. So you can mimic the drum beat totally. That makes the rhythm section start to sound tighter. That's where I like my bass player and I to be a lot of the times. A lot of the times that's the best feeling for us. As a rhythm section, as for the guitar can sustain the notes. And we do the and that basically allows the melody instrument to do whatever if we just lock it down like a solid metronome. Not saying we don't sustain notes and stuff, but even when a drummer is playing the beat, the hi-hats, if he opens the hi-hats, like a lot of drummers like open hi-hats, it's like the sustaining thing on the bass. But if you close them tight and do odd tight shots where it's so you can dance with the hi-hats. You can have this little accent opening. This opening and closing the hi-hats is similar to sustaining and choking the note on the bass guitar. No sustain there. Now the hi-hat does the same thing. It's like you can open it to make it sound like it's sizzling for quite a while, or you can bite it tight with your foot, just stomping it down to make it just choke. And that's the thing I grew up on, listening to funk players from the late 60s and early 70s. Their hi-hat technique was fantastic. I just loved what they did because they created such a dynamic in the music that went from soft and squishy to tight and squeaky, I guess is what I used to say. But anyways, the rhythm guitar can mimic the same thing, you know. And then all of you are playing the same pattern. A lot of syncopated playing is like that, where all the instruments are, especially in a lot of metal, heavy metal stuff, they strive on getting the rhythms of the guitar, the bass, and the drums tight. So they sound like one voice, even though they're done by 3 or more people. Now, you can do counter melodies and still sound tight. Okay? As long as some of the notes connect, there is, when some of the notes connect, I call those anchors. Okay? As long as you have at least one anchor between the bass and the drums and even the guitar, that will tighten things up. If you don't have that, you're kind of soul searching. Like an audience will not exactly feel that tight connection. You don't convey it to the audience if there's not some of those anchor notes. I hope you know what I mean there. So okay. Now what I'm doing is I'm mimicking the hi-hat. Same notes. 1 and 2 and 3. Those are eighth notes. Okay, so even though you're looking at my big face doing this, I'm trying to look at the screen here too, plus I'm trying to make it connect. Now, once I practice this rhythm with the bands, or with this machine over and over again, I will work on getting it tighter and tighter and tighter. Right now I'm just doing it first off, just like you would say on a jam night, trying to figure out how you're going to play with this band, and you just step up to play a few songs. So you got to find out where you want to lock onto. So bass player, it's pretty much easy. Same with the drummer, you both lock together. Universal language right there. The bass drum, that connects with the bass guitar. There's a reason why the name is the same. Bass guitar, bass drum. Okay. And I usually muffle from not playing a note, trying to get used to mimicking the drums. hi-hat is the timekeeper to the band. I can't stress how important the hi-hat is for drummers and to the band, because it is the band's metronome. Okay, sometimes you can't hear the low frequencies on the bass, so you need a locking anchor that everyone hears, and normally that's the hi-hat. The kick drum is fine and dandy. It's great for the audience on the dance floor as an anchor. But hi-hats, because they play in 8 notes, 16th notes, sometimes 32nds, and even 64th notes, pulsing on the hi-hat, it's just the timekeeper, okay? And where everybody should be to try and get a tight band. So here we go. We basically can do it steady through. So what I like to do is, and even in drumming sometimes, I will, I should say a lot of the time, do the part a couple of times and then put one little bend note or off note in there to convey that a bar or 2 bars have gone by. Right there. What those little subtle things do is add an anchor for someone else in the band to lock onto. If I was just to play and I'm a fill-in guy, what I would like is, can someone give me a cue so I don't screw up this song? Obviously, when you change chords, that's a clue there. But there might be some little middle fill or middle something that happens that comes out of nowhere. And sometimes just cueing it with an odd cradle note when I play drums on stage, I will count bars and have the odd time hi-hat shot in to help relay time to the guys. If it's coming back into from a verse to a chorus, drummers know that sometimes hitting a crash is the cue to help say, okay, here, this is where the change is. But leading up to that crash, sometimes you need little subtle tasty things just to help cue that crash is coming and also that change. So it's not such a blunt force trauma coming at you for the change. Because you only got milliseconds, and if you don't get it, then you're basically either playing a wrong note or not coming in on time. Okay, so you can play steady through that and still sound tight. But again, I hit the note and mute it right after. Because as a bass player, we want to mimic that kick drum in some ways. Now I'm mimicking that little snare vamp. Do it any number of ways. So anyways, I was kind of getting carried away there. It was like, oh, that's kind of fun. So that's the point. You can actually get really busy as long as you relay something to the band that they can lock onto. So many ways to mimic the drums, and so many ways for the drums to mimic a bass line. So right now we're just following this drum machine because it's always going to be locked into that, and eventually you get, you know, you can get some pretty neat ideas that are still tight, still relay an anchor, and keep the rhythm section tight. Now I could be a hell of a lot tighter, like that's pretty sloppy for me, but that's the whole point of this, is you're going to, you got an idea there, you want to get tighter with the drummer, you just keep practicing it, practicing it, and practicing it. And that's how, when you're with a band and you just join a band and you're meeting a bass player for the first time, this is where you start establishing that rhythm section language and working out and getting tighter. My bass player Paul and I, we've been together, I think it's got to be 8 years maybe, on and off, but 8 years for the most part. And we like lots of busy notes, so I'll play lots of busy notes on the drums. It doesn't lose him. He plays a lot of cool, intricate finger patterns on the bass, and we try and find a happy medium. For me, I'm just going to shut this off for a second. For me, I do these things called ghost strokes with the snare drum, and what we started doing in the last few years is the ghost stroke patterns. He starts doing that, mimicking the ghost stroke patterns with bass runs, or some type of really busy, funky pattern. And what it does is the ghost strokes are soft, but I still accent on the main pulses of the beat, but the ghost strokes fill in nicely. So sometimes he tries to go quiet for the ghost strokes and just nail harder on the downbeats. I can't do it like him because he's a great bass player and I'm just a hack, but you get the idea. And he'll muffle the strings. anyways, that's a technique that he's been playing around with a long time. And what it does is it accents the drumming. So we don't do it through whole songs, but little sections we start to do that in. And because we do our motions exactly the same, it sounds tight. And it didn't sound tight at the start because it was something new that we're kind of screwing around with at sound checks. And it really starts to develop the more you work at it. Like anything, you have to work at it. For the basics, though, you have the thing to make things tighter is kind of choking off sustain by muting. Making notes almost like bullets. Bink, 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 bink. You know, just staccato-ish. You can use sustained notes to hang on in a part before you resolve some section, and make that the cue to go on to the next section. So that's the whole point of getting tight, is to know that you can sustain or just pluck. So that's all in your personal technique. The main thing is you got to know how to count. Unless you really want to work extra hard and not learn how to count, and then just try and, as a band, try and work on this at practice. But if you know you're counting, so 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and stop, 2, 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and then 2, 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 1, 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. And if you get used to counting during your practicing, you don't have to do this on stage, obviously, but during your practicing, while you're trying to build up your own time, your internal clock, to get tighter with your own playing to the click, or your vocal counting. You don't have to do it on stage, but it's good to work on it. 1 and 2, 3 and 4, and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 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 and 1 and 2. Okay? Now I'm just playing one finger because, like I say, my other fingers are trapped under fake nails for my chicken picking, so they really get grabby, and I don't really like that sound on a bass. So I like the thuddiness of the fingers and just a bit of nail. It gets a little more bite, but my nails are a bit long and they dig in too much for bass, and it drives me bonkers because I can't do what I want to do. Anyways, so that's the scoop. Now for the guitar, let's try, just hold on a sec. We'll put this down. That's for the bass part of it anyways. And we'll grab an acoustic. A rather dirty acoustic. This is my workaholic guitar. And it's not in tune, but that's fine. It's close enough for rock and roll. So same idea. Anything to do with your chords. Now you can sustain those. What you want to do is get as tight to that first note of the kick drum. Get it tight with those drums. So you hear that's tighter already. Sustaining makes songs squishy and soft. Then when you tighten it, so I'm muting with the palm on the guitar, which most guitar players know. Anyways, I'm not telling them anything they don't know. We're just talking about how to get tight with drums or a band member. You can do both. Now, a lot of the times, the guitar player will mute the strings, but play a groove on the strings that mimics the drum beat. Doesn't have to be the exact same beat, but it has to have that kind of bouncy feel to match this one. Try that again. That's mimicking the drums. Now I'm mimicking the hi-hat. just like the bass, you can sustain, mute, or shots. Mute, like shots that are muted. That will affect the tightness of the band. Connecting to the drum parts, mainly the kick and the snare. Sure, if a drummer does a cool drum fill, you can work out parts for that. I was in a band where whatever the drum fill was, the bass and guitar, we had patterns that would all match to go through a drum fill. Trying to think what that, syncopated, I guess syncopated would be the word. I also tuned the drums, or hit the drums, well, originally I tuned the drums into the notes of that the guitar player was using, and then I would hit them the same way as the guitar player and the bass player. So it was kind of neat. It was a lot of work for one fill, but I mean, it did the trick, and it was pretty neat. So, and the same thing with picking. So if you're doing picking, you have to pick in time with those hi-hats and those drum and snare hits. Trying to pick all those little pieces and try and get them in time with the drums. Now I'm just randomly doing this as the hack musician that I am, but I know what I want to hear and I know how to achieve it. I just have to train my muscles and my brain that that's the journey I want to go, and I have to make sure I listen and pay attention to those drum parts for me to get tighter with it. So the best thing to do is practice this stuff really slow. Muting strings on a guitar and bass are tricky. That's why counting is important. 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 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 2 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2. this has to be kind of established in your band while you're playing it. The easiest thing to get tight is the bass and the drums, because their parts are usually connected quite a bit. As for the guitar, this is where guitar players develop their own voice, because there are guitar players that love to follow the bass and drums constantly. There are some guitar players that like to play counter melodies to what these other two instruments are doing. And piano is a similar thing, where a piano player might just accent the chords, or they do a counter melody to what the bass and guitar are doing. Counter melodies are interesting, but they also require a little bit of mathematics to make sure that they're tight in the song. Like when you listen to bands like Dream Theater, I think what's the other bands like maybe Planet X. Their parts are so tight. Like the bass player and the drummer can play the whole song without even having the other instruments there. They're so on top of their technique and the songs themselves, memory-wise, that they're totally confident with time. They're totally confident with their playing technique, and they execute it without even all the members being there, which is truly genius, actually. But it all comes down to practice, practice, practice. So for me, I practice bass and guitar for songwriting purposes only. I'm never going to be on stage, but I use some of these techniques to try and get tight in recordings. With recording, it's a little bit easier because I'm not playing the whole song from front to back. I'll do like a whole verse and play it, get it as best as possible, and then do the chorus separately. But in a live situation, you're there from beginning to end of that song, and this is where you need to practice and try and get the tightness factor happening. You can still do the very loose chords. You know, you can do that really loose playing and still has a great sound. Lots of bands have made killer careers out of that stuff. I'm just saying, if you want a band to sound even tighter, the techniques that I've practiced with other musicians in my bands, and a lot of it is the muting, sustaining techniques, and also definitely knowing time and where time is. Practicing to a metronome. You can always put the metronome away and go back to being, you know, a softer edge player, but it's something fun to attempt and see. And if you always wondered why some bands are tighter than the other, it's because they work on a lot of this stuff. It's like their main focus. You know, Rush back in the day was pretty tight rhythmically for a lot of their epic, you know, songs like Xanadu and things like that. And that's why when they play them live on stage, they still sound as good, is because they put so much time into it in the studio that they knew, well, we can't go half-assed on this live. We've got to be able to play this live. And so, I mean, I look up to that kind of drive and try it myself. I mean, not in the same league as those, obviously. I'll probably never, ever reach that. But that's still something that I work on every time I come down here to practice. Not so much on bass and guitar, because these are mainly just songwriting tools for me. But I still strive to get them as tight as possible. That at my caliber of those two musical instruments, I try and get them as good as I can. I'm definitely not in the league as some of the bass players around town or the guitar players, that's for sure. But these techniques will help a lot of people get tighter bands if they're a little more aware of how that is happening and the techniques to use. Alrighty, thanks for listening.